My name is Audrey Jensen, and at 35 years old, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. That was until I discovered my own parents had forged my signature to sell my beloved lake house, the one I spent 10 years of my life designing and building from scratch. The property I poured my heart, soul, and every spare dollar into was all to bail out my younger brother, Dean. Again, the worst part wasn't discovering the sale. It was hearing my mother say those words that still echo in my mind. Before I dive into how my own parents betrayed me, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had family take advantage of your success. Growing up in suburban, Dean would come up with a new get-rich-quick scheme, convince our parents it was a sure thing, take their money, fail spectacularly, and then start the cycle again. By the time I was 30, he tried opening a specialty coffee shop despite knowing nothing about coffee, started a clothing line that never produced a single garment, and attempted to create a social media app that never made it past the concept stage. Throughout all this, I continued building my career. My designs began winning awards, and I was featured in several architectural magazines. I sent copies to my parents, who placed them in a drawer while prominently displaying Dean's participation trophies from high school sports on their mantle. The distance between us grew wider with each passing year. I visited less frequently, tired of conversations that invariably turned to Dean's latest venture or crisis. Phone calls became shorter and less personal. I created a life separate from my family, with colleagues who respected my work and friends who valued me for who I was rather than how I compared to a sibling. It was during this period of growing independence that I first conceived of my lake house. I was 30 years old, financially stable for the first time in my life, and longing for a place that was truly mine. A sanctuary designed by me for me without compromise or consideration for anyone else's opinions or needs. A place where I could completely be myself. And that's exactly what I set out to create. Never imagining that this deeply personal project would eventually become the centerpiece of the greatest betrayal I'd ever experience at the hands of the people who were supposed to love me most. My lake house dream began on a cold January morning in 2013. I was scrolling through property listings during my lunch break, something I'd done regularly since my promotion. I wasn't seriously looking to buy, just daydreaming about possibilities when I saw it. 3 acres of lakefront property on Crystal Lake about 2 hours north of Chicago. The listing photo showed nothing but untouched land with 200 feet of shoreline, tall pines, and a small clearing that seemed to be waiting for something special to be built there. The price was steep, but not completely out of reach if I saved aggressively. I called the realtor on impulse and scheduled a viewing for the following weekend. Standing on that land in the crisp winter air, watching the sunlight sparkle across the frozen lake, I felt something I had never experienced before. A sense of belonging, of rightness. This was meant to be mine. I made an offer that same day, draining my savings account for the down payment and committing to a 15-year mortgage that would require significant sacrifices. When I called my parents to tell them about my purchase, my mother sighed. "Are you sure that's wise, Audrey? Property is such a responsibility and you're so busy with work," my father added. "You'll be house poor, and for what? A piece of land you'll visit twice a year." Their lack of enthusiasm didn't surprise me, but it still stung. What they didn't understand was that this wasn't just a financial investment or a vacation property. This was the physical manifestation of my independence, my success, and my vision. I spent the next year creating dozens of design iterations for my future home. As an architect, this was my chance to build without client constraints or budget compromises. I wanted a modern structure that would harmonize with the natural surroundings, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows to capture the lake views, an open-concept main living area, a studio where I could work on personal projects, and a wraparound deck for enjoying the outdoors in all seasons. Construction began in the spring of 2014. I hired a contractor I'd worked with professionally, but I supervised every aspect of the build, driving up every weekend to check progress and make adjustments. My colleagues thought I was obsessive, but this wasn't just any project. This was my dream taking physical form. The first phase of construction took 18 months and nearly depleted my savings. I moved into a smaller apartment in the city to reduce expenses and took on freelance design work in addition to my full-time job. Every extra dollar went toward the lake house. I brown-bagged my lunch, canceled my gym membership in favor of running in the park, and declined invitations that would cost money. By 2016, the main structure was complete, a 2,000 square foot contemporary home with a sloped roof that echoed the surrounding hills. The exterior was clad in cedar that would weather naturally over time, blending with the landscape. Inside, concrete floors were warmed by radiant heating, and the kitchen featured handcrafted cabinetry I designed myself. I invited my parents to see it that summer, hoping that seeing the physical results of my hard work might finally elicit the pride I always craved. They came for a brief afternoon visit, my mother commenting that the place seemed awfully big for just one person, while my father questioned the practicality of the maintenance costs. Dean didn't come, claiming he was too busy with his latest venture, a premium dog food company that would fold 6 months later. Their reaction didn't deter me. I continued investing in my sanctuary, adding custom built-ins, commissioning a local artist to create stained glass panels for the clear-story windows, installing a stone fireplace that became the heart of the main living space. Every feature was chosen with care. Every detail reflected something meaningful to me. Weekend after weekend, I would make the 2-hour drive north after work on Friday, often arriving after dark just to wake up to the sunrise over the lake on Saturday morning. Those solitary days at the lake house became my refuge from the pressures of my career and the complicated emotions surrounding my family. By 2018, 5 years into the project, the interior was mostly complete, and I turned my attention to the landscaping. I taught myself about native plants, installed a rain garden to manage water runoff, built stone pathways through the property, and created a fire pit area near the shoreline. I constructed a small dock where I could sit with my feet in the water, or launch the kayak I purchased that summer. The physical labor was therapeutic. Hours spent digging, planting, and hauling stones left me exhausted but fulfilled. My hands developed calluses, my skin tanned from days spent outdoors, and my mind cleared of the noise and stress that often accompanied my professional life. In the winters, I would bundle up and sit on the insulated porch, watching snow fall on the frozen lake while nursing a mug of hot chocolate. In spring, I cataloged the returning birds and the first green shoots pushing through the soil. Summers were spent in the water and working on outdoor projects, while fall brought spectacular colors and cool evenings around the fire pit. Through it all, the house evolved from a construction site to a home, from a dream to reality. I filled it with carefully chosen furnishings, artwork from local artists, books that had shaped my thinking, and mementos from my travels. Everything in the space had meaning. Everything had been selected with intention. By 2020, after 7 years of continuous investment and improvement, my sanctuary was nearly complete. The final touch was a custom stained glass window above the front door depicting the lake at sunset in vibrant blues, purples, and oranges. When the afternoon light filtered through it, the entryway was bathed in colored light that never failed to make me catch my breath. What my parents never understood, what I couldn't make them see, was that this place was more than a house or an indulgence. It was the physical embodiment of everything I achieved despite their lack of support. Every nail, every board, every plant represented a choice I made for myself, uninfluenced by their expectations or comparisons to Dean. In creating this home, I finally created a space where I could fully be myself. And then 3 years later, with a single forged signature, they tried to take it all away. It was a Tuesday afternoon in April when I first noticed something was wrong. I was working from home, going through my monthly budget and bill payments when I realized I hadn't received the property tax statement for the lake house. Typically, it arrived by the first week of April, but here we were on the 16th with nothing in my mailbox or email. Not overly concerned, I called the county treasurer's office, expecting to hear about a clerical delay or a change in their billing system. The conversation started normally enough. "This is Audrey Jensen. I'm calling about the property tax statement for my home on Crystal Lake, parcel number 87654, I said, reading the number from last year's statement. "Just a moment while I look that up for you," the clerk said. After a brief pause, she continued, "Miss Jensen, are you aware that this property was sold in January?" My heart seemed to skip a beat. "Excuse me, that's not possible. I didn't sell my property. According to our records, the property was sold on January 12th to Walter and Patricia Kingsley. The deed transfer was properly recorded with our office. This has to be a mistake," I insisted, my voice rising despite my attempts to remain calm. "I did not sell my property. I never even listed it for sale." The clerk seemed uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I can only tell you what our records show. The sale price was $690,000 and all the paperwork appears to be in order. The new owners would have received the tax statement." I hung up in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities. A clerical error seemed most likely, perhaps a mix-up with parcel numbers or addresses, but the specific sale amount and date suggested something more concrete than a simple mistake. I immediately called my bank to check for any large deposits. Nothing. No unexplained funds had entered my accounts in January or any time since. Next, I pulled up my credit report and identity monitoring service, looking for any signs of identity theft. Again, nothing unusual appeared. Growing increasingly alarmed, I contacted the county recorder's office and requested copies of all recent documents related to my property. They agreed to email them within 24 hours. I barely slept that night, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios and possible explanations. The documents arrived in my inbox at 8:30 the next morning. With shaking hands, I opened the attachment and stared in disbelief at what I saw. A legitimate-looking deed transfer complete with what appeared to be my signature, except I hadn't signed anything. I scrolled further and found a power of attorney document supposedly granting my father, Robert Jensen, the right to act on my behalf in real estate transactions. Again, it bore my signature, but I had absolutely no recollection of ever signing such a document. I printed the papers and examined them closely. The signatures looked convincingly like mine, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed either document. Someone had forged my signature, and the most likely culprits were the two people who would have had the easiest time mimicking my handwriting, my parents. Still trying to process this revelation, I searched online for real estate transactions in the Crystal Lake area, and found a recent listing for my property marked as sold. The listing agent was someone named Stephanie Garcia from Lakeshore Realty. I called the office immediately. "Hello, this is Audrey Jensen. I need to speak with Stephanie Garcia about a property she recently sold on Crystal Lake." After a brief hold, a woman with a bright professional voice came on the line. "This is Stephanie. How can I help you? You listed and sold a property on Crystal Lake, address 684, Pine Ridge Road in January. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's right. Beautiful property. The buyers are planning to tear down the existing structure and build something larger, I believe." My stomach lurched at hearing a stranger describe plans to demolish my carefully crafted home. "Miss Garcia, I am Audrey Jensen, the owner of that property. Or at least I was until someone sold it without my knowledge or consent." There was a long pause. "Miss Jensen, the property was sold by your father acting as your power of attorney. He had all the proper documentation. Are you saying you didn't authorize this?" "Absolutely not. I never signed a power of attorney, and I certainly never authorized anyone to sell my home." She lowered her voice. "Miss Jensen, this is a very serious accusation. The sale has been completed. The funds were transferred to an account designated by your father. $690,000 to be exact." "Which account?" "It wasn't mine. I don't have that information on hand, but it wouldn't have been unusual for the proceeds to go to a different account than the one in your name, especially with a power of attorney situation. I need copies of all the paperwork related to this sale immediately." I could hear her hesitation. "Legally, I'm not sure I can just—" "Miss Garcia," I interrupted, my voice steely with determination. "Someone has committed fraud. Either you can help me get to the bottom of this now or I can involve the police and have them subpoena your records. Your choice." She agreed to email me the documents within the hour. True to her word, 50 minutes later, my inbox contained copies of everything related to the sale. The listing agreement signed by my father as my power of attorney, the purchase agreement, closing documents, and a wire transfer receipt showing the proceeds had been sent to a bank account I didn't recognize. I called the bank listed on the wire transfer receipt, but as expected, they refused to give me any information about the account due to privacy regulations. However, the customer service representative did let slip that the account was a joint one established over 30 years ago, which aligned with my parents' long-standing bank. My suspicions were now virtual certainties. My parents had somehow forged my signature on a power of attorney document, used it to sell my beloved lake house without my knowledge, and pocketed nearly $700,000 from the sale. But why? My parents weren't wealthy, but they weren't in dire financial straits either. My father had retired from his management position at a manufacturing company 5 years earlier with a decent pension, and my mother had always been a homemaker. They lived modestly but comfortably. The only explanation that made sense was Dean, my 31-year-old brother, who had never held a job for more than 6 months, who had burned through multiple business opportunities funded by my parents, who had always been the center of their universe. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the damning paperwork, a cold rage building inside me. This wasn't just about money, though the financial loss was staggering. This was about the violation of trust, the callous disregard for something they knew was precious to me, and the stunning realization that in their eyes, I would always be worth less than my brother. I booked a flight to Minnesota for the following morning. This confrontation needed to happen face to face. The flight from Chicago to Minneapolis felt interminable. I spent those 2 hours alternating between rehearsing what I would say to my parents and trying to calm the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Anger, betrayal, hurt, disbelief. All competed for dominance as I stared out the small airplane window at the clouds below. I rented a car at the airport and drove the familiar route to my childhood home in the suburbs. A modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a well-maintained lawn, the house where I had grown up feeling like a perpetual disappointment, always in the shadow of my brother's golden glow. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed both my parents' cars were there. A small mercy that meant I wouldn't have to track them down separately. I sat in the rental car for several minutes, gathering my courage and composing myself. The documentation was in my briefcase, irrefutable evidence of their betrayal. I wouldn't leave without answers. My mother answered the door, surprise registering on her face before she recovered with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Audrey, what a nice surprise. We weren't expecting you." I forced a smile in return. I was in the area for work and thought I'd stop by. I wasn't entirely sure why I was lying. Perhaps to see how they would act if they thought this was just a casual visit. My father appeared in the hallway behind her, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like guilt before he too pasted on a smile. Come in, come in. Your mother just made some coffee." I followed them into the kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd sat through countless family meals, watching my parents dote on Dean while barely acknowledging my presence. The familiar yellow curtains and worn oak table sent an unwelcome wave of nostalgia through me. We engaged in painfully ordinary small talk as my mother poured coffee and offered homemade cookies. I answered questions about work, the weather in Chicago, and my flight with automatic responses while studying their faces for signs of the deception I now knew they were capable of. "So, how's the lake house?" I finally asked, my voice carefully neutral as I stirred my coffee. "Any good fishing on Crystal Lake this time of year?" My mother dropped her spoon with a clatter. My father suddenly became very interested in a spot on the tablecloth. The silence stretched for several seconds before my mother recovered. "Oh, it's probably still too cold for good fishing," she said vaguely. My father nodded too enthusiastically. "Maybe next month would be better." I took a sip of coffee, my hand steady despite the fury building inside me. The strangest thing happened yesterday. I called the county to ask about my property tax bill, and they told me the property had been sold in January. Isn't that bizarre? My mother's face drained of color. My father coughed and stood up abruptly, moving to the sink. "How much?" I demanded. My parents exchanged glances. "Almost all of it," my mother admitted reluctantly. $600,000. The rest went to buy into a franchise opportunity. A sure thing this time. I laughed bitterly. A sure thing like the coffee shop, the clothing line, the dog food company, the food truck. How many sure things has Dean burned through with your money? And now apparently with my money too. The front door slammed and moments later, Dean himself strolled into the kitchen, stopping short when he saw me. His handsome face, so similar to our father's, registered surprise before shifting into the easy charm he had always used to get his way. "Sis, what are you doing here?" He moved to hug me, but I stepped back and his arms fell awkwardly to his sides. "I was just asking Mom and Dad about how they forged my signature to sell my lake house to bail you out of trouble again," I said coldly. Dean's eyes darted to our parents before he attempted a casual shrug. "Look, I know it seems bad, but you don't understand the pressure I was under. These guys weren't joking around. And besides, it's just a vacation house. You have your condo in the city. It's not like you're homeless. Just a vacation house, I repeated incredulously. I spent 10 years of my life on that property. I designed every inch of it myself. I worked weekends and holidays to build it. It was my sanctuary, my greatest achievement. And you all decided it was yours to sell without even consulting me. Dean rolled his eyes. Always so dramatic. It's just a building, Audrey. Family is what matters. And family helps each other out when they're in trouble. Help! I exploded. Is that what you call this? Stealing from me? Committing fraud? Destroying something that mattered to me? My mother stood up, her face flushed with anger. Now you're just being selfish. Your brother could have been seriously hurt if we didn't get that money. Those men he owed weren't the type to take no for an answer. What were we supposed to do? Watch him get beaten up or worse? You could have come to me? I said, my voice breaking slightly. You could have asked me for help. Instead, you went behind my back and stole from me. Would you have helped? My father asked quietly. Would you really have given Dean $600,000 if we'd asked? The question hung in the air. Would I have? Probably not the full amount, but I might have helped with some of it, set up a payment plan, or found another solution. But they'd never given me the chance to make that choice. We knew you'd say no, my mother said, confirming my thoughts. You've always been jealous of your brother. Always resented how special he is. I stared at her in disbelief. Special? Dean's 31 years old and has never supported himself for more than a few months at a time. Has blown through countless opportunities that you funded. And now you've stolen my property to bail him out again. How is that special? Not everyone fits into your perfect little box, Audrey, Dean said condescendingly. Some of us are entrepreneurs. We take risks. Sometimes those risks don't pan out, but that's how you eventually hit it big. And have you hit it big yet? After how many failed businesses? This franchise is different, Dean insisted. It's a proven model. The previous owner is retiring, but the customer base is solid. It's basically a guaranteed income. I shook my head, realizing the futility of this argument. We'd had versions of it for years, and nothing ever changed. Dean would always be the golden child who deserved endless chances, and I would always be the responsible one expected to understand and sacrifice. You know what you've done is illegal, right? I said, gathering the documents from the table. Forgery, fraud, theft, these are serious crimes. My mother scoffed. You're not going to the police. We're your family. A family that stole from me. We did what we had to do, she repeated stubbornly. I looked at each of them in turn. These people who shared my blood but who had never truly seen me, never valued me as much as they valued Dean. And suddenly, beneath my anger, I felt something unexpected. A flicker of amusement, almost satisfaction. I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corners of my mouth. My mother narrowed her eyes. What's so funny? The smile grew. Nothing really. Just that I think there's something you should know about the property you sold. My parents and brother stared at me, confusion evident on their faces as my smile widened. What are you talking about? My mother demanded, suspicion replacing her righteous indignation. I set my coffee cup down carefully. About a year ago, I became concerned about some things I was noticing. Dad calling to ask detailed questions about my finances under the guise of fatherly advice. Mom mentioning repeatedly how much money I must have tied up in the lake house. Dean asking if I had considered renting the property out commercially. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. At first, I thought you were just taking an interest in my life for once, I continued. But something felt off, so I decided to protect myself just in case. Protect yourself? How? Dean asked, a note of worry creeping into his voice. I pulled out my phone, opened the Photos app and slid it across the table. The image on screen showed me standing on a dock, the familiar lake house visible in the background. The timestamp showed the picture had been taken yesterday. My mother snatched up the phone. That's impossible. The house was sold months ago. No, I corrected her. A property was sold months ago, just not my lake house. What are you talking about? My father asked, the first flickers of alarm showing on his face. I took back my phone and swiped to another photo. This one showing a plot of undeveloped land adjacent to my actual property. 684 Pine Ridge Road, the address on the deed you sold. My investment lot that I purchased as a buffer property 2 years ago. I had it registered under an LLC for privacy. The actual lake house is at 686 Pine Ridge Road, registered in my name. The color drained from my mother's face. You're lying. I shook my head. I'm afraid not. You sold the empty lot next to my house. It's worth maybe $150,000 at market rate, though. You somehow convinced those poor buyers to pay nearly $700,000 for it. I imagine they're going to be quite upset when they realize they massively overpaid for undeveloped land. My brother slumped into a chair. But the realtor showed us photos of the house. The listing had pictures of your place. Of course it did, I replied. Dad provided those pictures, didn't he? The realtor never visited the property in person. Dad handled everything, showing the supposed power of attorney and providing photos of what the buyers thought they were getting. It's a common real estate scam, just usually not perpetrated by family members against each other. My father had gone pale. His hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup. So the property, my mother began. My actual lake house is still mine, safe and sound. I stayed there last night, in fact, before flying here this morning. Dean jumped to his feet. You have to be kidding me, Dad. Is this true? Did you sell the wrong property? My father couldn't meet his eyes. The address on the paperwork was 684. I thought that was Audrey's place. I never checked. The realtor handled everything based on the information and photos I provided. Jesus Christ, Dean muttered, pacing the kitchen. So the franchise deal I'm about to sign might be a problem, I finished for him. Since the money you thought you had doesn't actually exist, or rather, it exists, but represents a fraudulent sale of land that isn't worth nearly what the buyers paid. My mother recovered her composure, her expression hardening. Well, what's done is done. They paid for the property. They own it now. It's their problem if they didn't inspect it before buying. I raised an eyebrow. That's fraud, Mom. Clear and simple. You knowingly misrepresented what was being sold. And you still committed forgery with the power of attorney document. The kitchen fell silent as the implications sank in. So what now? My father finally asked, his voice small and defeated. Well, I leaned back in my chair. That depends. The way I see it, you're in serious legal trouble either way. You forged my signature. You sold property under false pretenses. The buyers have a solid case for fraud. Dean slammed his hand on the table. This is your fault. You tricked us. I laughed incredulously. My fault? How exactly is your attempt to steal from me my fault? If you just helped when I asked for money last year, none of this would have happened, Dean shouted. You never asked me for money last year, I pointed out calmly. You asked me to invest in your sports memorabilia business, and I declined because your business plan was full of holes. There's a difference. My mother stood up, her face flushed with anger. So, you're going to turn us in your own family? Send us to jail. I studied her for a long moment. This woman who had given birth to me, but had never truly seen me. I haven't decided yet, I said honestly. But I have already spoken with the police and my attorney. They know what happened. Dean's face contorted with panic. You can't do this to me. I signed the franchise papers yesterday. The money was supposed to be transferred tomorrow. Again, not my problem, I replied. You participated in fraud. Actions have consequences. My father cleared his throat. What? What do you want, Audrey? There must be something we can do to fix this. I looked at him, searching for any sign of genuine remorse rather than just fear of consequences. Fix it how? The breach of trust here is pretty fundamental. You were willing to steal something precious from me to give Dean yet another chance he's likely to waste. I want the money back, I continued after a pause. All of it. The buyers deserve their money returned, and you'll need to confess to the fraud. As for our relationship, I guess that's up to you. Are you finally ready to acknowledge the pattern that's been playing out our entire lives? My mother bristled. What pattern? The one where Dean gets everything and I get nothing. Where his failures are overlooked while my successes are ignored. Where you're willing to commit crimes to support him, but can't even show basic respect for me, and what I've built. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. Isn't it? Name one time you supported my dreams the way you support Dean's. One time you invested in my future the way you repeatedly invest in his. The silence that followed was answer enough. My phone rang, breaking the tension. It was my attorney. I answered, stepping into the living room for privacy. When I returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, my family was huddled together, speaking in hushed tones that ceased abruptly when I appeared. That was my lawyer, I told them. The buyers of the property have discovered the discrepancy. They're understandably upset about paying luxury home prices for an empty lot. They've already filed a police report. My father put his head in his hands. Dean cursed under his breath. My mother remained stone-faced. So that's it then, my father said quietly. We're going to jail. Not necessarily, I replied. My lawyer thinks we might be able to work something out if you're willing to make this right. A settlement agreement, full restitution to the buyers, and mandatory therapy for all of you. Dean scoffed. Therapy? We're not crazy. No, but you're dysfunctional, and you need to understand why what you did was wrong on a fundamental level, not just legally. My mother crossed her arms. And if we refuse? Then I press charges for forgery and fraud, and the buyers do the same. And given the dollar amount involved, we're talking about felony charges. The three of them exchanged glances, a silent family communication that had always excluded me throughout my childhood. Finally, my father spoke. We'll do it. Whatever it takes to make this right. I wasn't sure if I believed him, if any of them truly understood the depth of the betrayal, or if they were just trying to avoid legal consequences. But it was a start, a small crack in the family dynamic that had been set in stone for decades. What I didn't tell them was that this moment, this confrontation, had finally freed me from the need for their approval. Seeing the lengths they would go to benefit Dean at my expense had broken something inside me, but in breaking it had also released me. I no longer needed them to see my worth. I could see it clearly myself. The next morning I met with my attorney Elaine Chambers at her Minneapolis office. A sharp woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes. She had flown in from Chicago at my request to handle this sensitive family matter. All right, Audrey, walk me through everything again, she said, legal pad ready. I want to make sure we have all the facts straight before meeting with your parents' attorney. I recounted the entire story from discovering the fraudulent sale to the confrontation with my family. Elaine took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. So the buyers discovered they purchased an empty lot instead of your lake house, she summarized. And they've already filed a police report for fraud. But your parents and brother haven't been arrested yet. Not yet. The detective I spoke with said they're building the case. Since I came forward voluntarily with information about the forgery, they're giving me some latitude in how this proceeds. Elaine nodded. That's good. It gives us room to negotiate. The fact that you weren't actually deprived of your lake house works in our favor, too, though the forgery of the power of attorney is still a serious offense. She paused, studying me. Are you sure you want to pursue a settlement rather than pressing full charges? I sighed, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. They're my family despite everything. I don't want to see them in prison if it can be avoided. But I do want them to face consequences and hopefully learn something from this. Fair enough. And your brother? His involvement seems more peripheral, though he clearly benefited from the attempted fraud. Deal with him the same as my parents. He may not have forged the signatures, but he was fully aware of the plan and intended to use the proceeds for his business. Later that afternoon, we met with my parents and their hastily retained attorney, a nervous man named Harold Wilson, who seemed out of his depth with the complexity of the case. My brother slouched in a chair at the conference table, alternating between checking his phone and glaring at me. The terms of our proposed settlement were straightforward. My parents would make full restitution to the buyers, covering both the purchase price and any additional damages for the fraud. They would admit to the forgery and fraudulent sale in a signed statement, but would not face criminal charges if they complied with all conditions. Additionally, they would be required to attend family,